Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. My name is Salvador Brigman. Thank you for tuning in weekly to this show. Go and check out some of the other episodes I got out there in iTunes or on Spotify or on my website, crowdcrux.com. Today's episode, we're talking about something that I didn't even know was like a big thing, honestly, which is solitary board games and solitary tabletop games. So you think of like tabletops and board games, and I usually think playing with other people, right? That's the only kinds that I've played, but you can actually have a solitary game. It's kind of like a whole new thing, and I think a growing industry where you can have a very beautiful looking, intensive, immersive game, and you can just be playing with yourself. And it's kind of like this, almost like you think a first-person game, you're playing Halo or like, Xbox or something like that. I kind of think of it in that light, right? So today's creator came on and shared the step-by-step plan for having a successful campaign in this category on Kickstarter. And he raised nearly $200,000, more than 2,000 backers, and his company has actually created 19 games in the past. So this is a proven formula, a proven step-by-step blueprint for really knocking it out of the park. You're going to hear a little bit about that story today, but this is like, obviously, this isn't something that is out of the norm here on this show. Like, I love to have on people who have practical advice to impart to you, have wisdom to share with you, and some of the things you should be aware of if you're going into your first campaign, if you're going into your 10th campaign. Like, this is really there for you, where I always wanted to get to the root of what causes some of these projects to be so successful. And it's something where, like, in some cases you can read a book on how to do something, but other times you kind of have to go to the horse's mouth and just figure out by asking people and interviewing people, what are they doing right? What are the tools that they're using to be more successful? What are the strategies that they're adopting, etc. So I try to do that with every single podcast guest that I have on, and I'm doing it for you, making sure that we can ask really tailored questions to unearth what they are doing right, what they would do differently, and where their sources of pledges are coming from. And not from, Kickstarter's obviously been around for a few years, but I really want to get to the types of things that are working nowadays, right, for you, the things that are relevant here. So that's the whole goal with this show. But I also have a step-by-step blueprint out there when it comes to raising money on Kickstarter, and that's called the Kickstarter Launch Formula. This guide is the culmination of the last 8 years of my learnings, the things that I've coalesced when it comes to the most useful tools. And I think that, honestly, the most proven ways that I've discovered in order to drive direct backers, traffic, and revenue to your project. So it's very actionable. If you're interested, you can pick up a copy on Audible, and you can listen to this in the car on the way to work, etc. You can go to crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That's crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. I hope you enjoy that guide. But without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode.
Thanks for having me, man.
So why don't we get started? You can tell us a little bit about this board game that you guys have created. It looks really neat. Love the artwork. Maybe we can get started there.
Yeah. So we have this is our second solid solo focused board game, which, for people who aren't familiar with kind of the niche hobby board gaming market, there is like a real demand for solitaire board gaming experiences, and more complex ones than you would get if you're just playing solitaire cards or something. That might seem kind of crazy, but it's true. So this we have another game series called Hostage Negotiator, which is a solitaire, and Final Girl is a variation on that. So Hostage Negotiator is sold tens of thousands of units, and so we modified the mechanics of that to fit kind of a horror movie universe, and that's what Final Girl is.
I did not know that trend existed. That's really interesting.
The top, first of all, most board games that launch on Kickstarter now include some kind of solo mode. It's a big enough demographic that all the publishers feel they have to put a solitaire version of their game somewhere. Now, most of those games are multiplayer games, normal multiplayer board games that then they kind of tweak to figure out how someone could play it by themselves. Mm-hmm. But our game is designed from the ground up to be a solitaire experience.
That's so cool. Yeah, I have not heard of that, but that makes a lot of sense. It's almost kind of like you're playing a video game. You have like solo player mode, then you're playing with other people. Makes a lot of sense. When it comes to your studio here, I mean, you guys have made a lot of projects over the years. Like I think you're at, what is it, over 20, definitely over 20. 19 you've created. So just shy of 20. That's impressive, man. Like when you were first getting started, when was that? Was that 2015, 2014?
So the company was started. I actually joined I wasn't there at its inception. My partner and co-designer on Final Girl, his name's AJ Porfirio. He started the company in around 2012 and launched a board game on Kickstarter then. And I joined him 3 or 4 projects later. So I've been around for the majority of the projects. But yeah, he started in 2012 and was doing it by himself. And at some point I showed up and was like, hey, I would like to pick your brain because I might want to start my own board game company. And he goes, well, rather than doing that, why don't you just join me? And we tried it out. And as I'm sure a lot of your listeners might know, a good business partnership is like a good marriage. And so we just complemented each other really well. And he handles all the business and logistics and stuff because he's got a business degree, and I'm our graphic designer and creative director, so I handle all the look of our projects, and we both like the same kind of games, and so it clicked really well.
Were you working at a larger board game company before that, or were you doing design work, or what were you doing before?
No, I was I did digital marketing, ran digital marketing campaigns for films and movies.
Ooh, that sounds cool. Interesting. As it relates to like this board game craze, I guess, when it comes to the worldwide, more people launching tabletops and such, was like board gaming for you a hobby? Had you done micro board games before you like partnered up with your friend?
I've always loved games. I have memories of trying to get my family members to play board games with me as a child. So I've always loved games, but it wasn't until probably around 2008, so around 12 years ago, that I kind of rediscovered how much the board gaming scene had grown. Stumbled across a website called Board Game Geek, and it just kind of it opened up a whole new world to me, and I just stumbled down the rabbit hole and haven't looked back since.
When you were looking at that and like, you mentioned having the realization of how much it's grown. Was that just Kickstarter, or were there other elements at play there?
Oh no, that was long before Kickstarter existed. So I remember going to this website, Board Game Geek, and they had like a top, like the top 100 board, like it was a list. And I looked at the number one game, which had like 10, 15, 20,000 ratings. So it wasn't insignificant. It was called Puerto Rico, and it looked ugly as it just looks so boring. And I remember looking at this and going, how is this I've never even heard of this game. How is this the number one game on this website that 20,000 people think it's the number one game? And so I bought a copy and played it, and it was just the mechanics were so different. It was like nothing I'd ever played before. And it just, once you kind of experience that in the board gaming world, you realize how much else is out there. That there are games that are so much farther beyond Monopoly or Risk or Sorry, which aren't terrible games, but they were all designed in like the 40s and 50s and 60s. It would be kind of like if in the only movies you ever watched were silent movies from the 30s and 40s, and all of a sudden you stumbled across Christopher Nolan or Marvel films, and you go, how? It would completely
just blow your mind. Yeah. I mean, I think too, when you're thinking about board games, most of us are introduced to them by our parents. Like your parents play something, okay, it's game night, we're going to play this, right? But then when you start searching out your own, you start discovering this whole niche of like new ways of playing, new storylines and stuff. Like it can be really addictive almost, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my collection ballooned to, currently I have a modest collection of like 300 to 400 games. That's actually in our hobbies, in our space. That's actually not that unreasonable. That's actually pretty restrained.
When you made that idea in your head of like, now I think I might actually create my own game, did you ever imagine you'd be doing that for a living, or was that just kind of like an idea in your head?
At the time it was just an idea in my head. The first game I designed was a game called Dark Moon, which was published by another company before I joined Van Ryder full time. Um, at that juncture, it was just, hey, I like board games. I like making things. I should try designing one. That's all it was. And the game I designed ended up being somewhat of a modest success, which then kind of inflated my ego and made me think I could do this for full time. And I still probably think I could do it full time.
When you started to like look at crowdfunding, right, and Kickstarter and these things, I'm sure you have some kind of a conception of how that was. Almost like with the board game, you have an idea of like, okay, I think I know what board games are. Psych, it's like actually this other thing, right? Did you also have that kind of realization with Kickstarter when you did your first project?
I had already backed, by the time I had run my first project with Van Ryder, I had already backed a number of campaigns. I do remember the moment when I realized Kickstarter was going to be a big deal for board games. A company called CMON, Cool Mini or Not, uh, released a game called Zombicide, which at the time did $700,000,
Jeez.
which was astronomical at that time. Now like that's not a small number, but even to them, it's kind of chump change when other campaigns have racked up in the millions. Like Frosthaven right now is got 8 million something, is on track to become the most funded board game project of all time. But back then, 700K was stunning. And the way they did it, they completely established the trend of miniatures heavy games and the model to follow for that, and there are entire companies that wouldn't exist if not for CMON running Zombicide. So I remember when I saw that and what they did, and I was pretty stunned, amazed at the potential for what tabletop board game projects could do on Kickstarter.
Now that you've done a bunch of these, do you have like one or two simple lessons that you could share as it relates to like a new gamer, someone who's just now doing their first Kickstarter or their second one, and they're kind of wondering like what they should be doing, what really they should be spending their time on, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
The most important thing, I think, is, this sounds pretty simple, but it's what your product is, what you're offering. The trajectory of your campaign, the trajectory of what you're going to do is almost decided months in advance when you're making certain key decisions. How is your product? What's it gonna look like? What's the price point going to be? How is it going to look art wise? How's it gonna function? All of those things go into whether or not someone's going to be interested in your product or not. Meaning, once your campaign goes live and you see your first numbers come in, it's almost like the writing's on the wall. At that juncture, there's very, very little you can do, I believe, to change the trajectory of your campaign. So the most important decisions you make are made months in advance. I've been on campaigns that have struggled, and so you're constantly in the middle of the campaign trying to figure out, can we go to this blog? Can we post these things? Maybe we just create more social media posts. What can we do for advertising? All this kind of stuff. And at that point, the impact you can have on your campaign is minimal. You've already made your product offering, and if people want it, great. If they don't, they don't.
Do you think the most important thing when you're creating a new game is it getting play testing and feedback and sort of judging that way, or is it looking at the actual like category you're in, sort of like almost like a book genre? You have a board game genre. What do you think how do you figure that out? Basically, is it play testing?
Playtesting is really important for the quality of the game, but that matters very, very, very little on a Kickstarter campaign. That'll matter way down the road. Once people get the game in their hands, that has an impact on how well the game does after Kickstarter, how it does in retail, whether word of mouth carries it. But on Kickstarter, like it doesn't, like, how the game actually plays is not even the most important consideration. It's much more important how it looks, how the art is, what genre or niche it's in, that kind of thing. So with Final Girl, I mean, we thought very long and hard about positioning it. Knew that there weren't a lot of horror movie games in the hobby gaming space, and knowing the success of Hostage Negotiator, we thought if we took that system and ported it over to the world, we thought we'd have a really strong product on our hands. But we didn't know for sure until we saw our day one numbers, which were over 100K on day one.
That's impressive, man. Congrats.
Thank you. But up until that point, it could have just done 30, could have done 20 or 30. It's possible that we put this out there and people went, I don't really like the theme, or I don't really want a solo game, or I've already got Hostage Negotiator. Why would I want this? But thankfully, the decisions we made about positioning the product, it was something we wanted. Mm-hmm. We wanted this game, and so it translated that a lot of other people wanted it too.
Did you do any kind of things like surveying your existing buyers and maybe sending out an email and being like, hey, we're thinking about making this type of project. Would you be interested, or what would be important to you in a game like that? Did you do anything like that?
We don't tend to do those kinds of things. Although once we see, like, for example, right now, a lot of people are discussing like the victims in the game. They're just little wooden abstracted, we call them meeples, mm-hmm. Little yellow meeples. But everybody's saying that they want miniatures. And so that's been a discussion in our comments. And so we actually put a poll out asking people, do you like the meeples? Do you want minis? Would you like us to offer minis for the victims? Would you pay more for that? So in the middle of the campaign over a small thing like that, we are polling our backers and checking the feedback and seeing if there's a way we can change the product to make it something better for them. Mm-hmm. But early on, those aren't normally the kinds of things we do. We tend to make the kind of games that we personally really want. And so far, it's worked out that the kinds of games that we want to make that our interests align with our audience.
One of my really important questions here, when it comes to the climate that we're in right now, has to do with the coronavirus, right? And just, I think common sense, a lot of people are thinking it's not a good time to launch a project, or they should hold off. What has your experience been like running a campaign and launching this, and being really brave, I think, also about doing that during this time of the year?
Well, I can tell you what I think right now, but it could change in a month. True. By the time people listen, by the time people listen to this, the landscape could have completely changed. So, I mean, when it all started in March, we had already set our launch date of April 20th. And then when this all started in March, and it became clear that it was going to be impacting things and then impacting the economy and all that other kind of stuff, tons of creators pulled their projects, their board game projects that were planned. They hit the eject button, and I don't blame them at all. And we probably would have done that if not for the fact that we're a small company. And we depend in part upon our Kickstarter projects for our revenue and our overhead. It's not just me and AJ. We have a number of other employees. And with the whole COVID-19 thing, conventions are being canceled later this year. Retail sales are drying up because board game stores are closed. So a number of our other revenue streams were evaporating. And so we said, well, we have to go. We have to go now. We have to put this project out now. We don't really have another option. So it wasn't so much like a courageous stand as, well,
we got to do it.
We've got to do it and hope it works well. And so what has happened from at least my anecdotal perception is that enough people pulled their campaigns that they cleared the field. And so usually there's just tons and tons and tons. I mean, gosh, there might be like 10 to 20 significant Kickstarter projects in the board game space alone launching per day, which is an enormous amount of competition. Mm-hmm. And so because a lot of them hit the eject button, we were all of a sudden one of only a handful of projects out there. And I think it allowed Final Girl a little more breathing room. Like, we were at one point on the day we launched, the most popular tabletop game on Kickstarter, however they compute that algorithm. Not most funded, but most popular. And we were the second most popular campaign across the entire site.
Wow. Which
we've never, and it's, now we're not. Now we're 6th or 7th most popular. But on day one, we were the second most popular campaign across the entire site. And I don't think that would have happened if there hadn't been a number of other campaigns that had jumped ship.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're running a marathon and all these other competitors decide to drop out of the race, right? So suddenly you start it's a lot easier to go to the finish line and to finish first or second, right?
And I don't want to diminish the fact that as a product, Final Girl still is really connected with the audience. But it's certain, and it seems that even though these are luxury products, it seems that people aren't. There aren't so many people impacted by the economic downturn that they're pulling their funding, at least not measurably. I mean, this is so far on track to be our best funded campaign ever. Now, if there were the same number of projects launching that had been launched in, just 6 months ago, during the middle of the pandemic, I think you'd be seeing everybody's numbers go down because the pool would be diluted.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, this is your perspective now. We have no idea what in the future, that's going to hold in store and everything.
Maybe in a month or 2 months, when some of the economic realities really begin to hit people, people could tighten their purse strings significantly, shore up their budgets, and not be backing projects like this. So that could be the reality in a month or two. But currently, it hasn't been true. It's our most successful campaign ever.
One other question I had for you here was, you mentioned the importance of having a really quality look and feel for your game, and that kind of being what people are drawn to, attracts their attention, where they really vibe, the actual interest in the game comes from that. How do you put together your artwork for the page? Because it's just so beautiful, all of the rewards here and the miniatures and the gameplay. Do you outsource that? Do you use any tools, or is this like all just you going down and doing Illustrator and Photoshop to get those together?
We do it all internally. So we have another I'm a graphic designer by trade, and we have another graphic designer on staff now who did a lot of the work on the page. A lot of it just comes from us having run 18, 19 campaigns now. We just kind of, and also being pretty prolific Kickstarter backers ourselves. I personally have backed over 100 projects. My partner's backed over 100 projects. We got another guy on our staff who's backed like 300 or 400. So we love getting board games off of Kickstarter, and we've made 18 projects. So a lot of it is just the experience of knowing what we want things to look like. So,
do you have any advice on putting those together, or even just the psychology of listing out the rewards or anything along those lines?
I'd say that if you're wanting to run not just any Kickstarter project, but specifically a board game project, just go look at a number of really top campaigns and study how they position things graphically. And if you are not personally able to do high quality graphics, then you do probably need to hire someone. The look of a page is super, super, super important. It really needs to look high quality to be able to attract people to buy. It's one of the most important things.
I love just how clear it is on the page, seeing things like the add-ons and the stretch goals, even the shipping and how that varies from country to country. It makes it like, so there's almost no guesswork, right? You don't have to go on the rewards and like figure out, okay, what is this price going to be? What do I do for the add-ons? Like, it's so clear and just easy to read there. I think I really like that a lot.
That is, I mean, we're constantly pulling between, is it too complicated, or is it not, or are we not explaining the project enough? So even if you go down to our section about the gameplay, that's like it's got like 7 or 8 steps, and we animated all the different things so you can kind of see how the game works. But even that is highly, highly simplified, and we cut a bunch of stuff out and had a lot of internal discussions of, well, do we show this part of the gameplay or not? And so we're constantly having those discussions of, is it too complex? Is the page getting too long? Is there too much information there? Or is it just the right amount? Or do we not have enough?
What I love too is, as I'm going down the page and seeing just the illustrations, the colors, the looks, the GIFs, it almost makes me feel like I'm kind of getting a sample of the game, just the playing vibe of it, right? So rather than just seeing walls and walls of text and learning about it intellectually, I'm almost getting like an emotional experience. You know, almost as like you had your own website that looks like this, but you're doing it on Kickstarter and using images to kind of convey that. That's
a big part of, a lot of people make their decisions to back stuff based on the look and feel of the page. Also value, in terms of how much is this going to cost me, and do I think that the value's there for what I'm getting? They make their decisions based on that. So we do put a lot of thought into the look of the page, because a lot of people, they don't spend a lot of time on these pages. I personally, when I'm looking at backing something, I might spend 5 minutes tops on a page before I make a decision. So you don't have a lot of time to capture their attention and interest amongst the hundreds of other board game projects that are currently on Kickstarter. So you've got to be sharp enough to grab their eyeballs right away.
One question I really wanted to ask you, because you seem like you have a pretty good handle of this, comes down to these single player games, right? And something that I wasn't so much aware of, but the fact you can have like a solo game and still be really successful with that. What do you think goes into creating a successful solo game for other tabletop creators out there?
What goes into creating a successful solo game? Well, I mean, it needs to be engaging and dynamic and fun. Oftentimes, one of the strongest parts of board gaming is the social aspect. So when you're interacting with other people around the table, and in a solo game, you don't have that. So the game itself has to be able to react to you nimbly. It's almost like you have to develop a really strong AI system for the game to play against. And so the game, it honestly can't be that simple. It's got to be pretty robust and pretty entertaining. And what we've done with Final Girl is we've introduced so much thematic variance. So there are all kinds of different ways you can change the game. You can fight against different killers. You can choose the locations. So you can play Hans the Butcher, who's kind of like a Jason Voorhees riff, at the Camp Happy Trails. But there's also a poltergeist you can face off against a haunted manor. But then you can swap them, and you can play Hans at the haunted manor, and you can play the poltergeist at the camp, and it creates all new experiences. And so we've really tried to introduce a lot of variability, so that when someone sits down, when someone gets the game or backs the game, they know they're not just going to have one kind of experience that's going to be played over and over and over again until they get bored, but that the game can really change and adjust and give you brand new experiences. So I'd say for anyone who wants to create a solo game, you need to find something that's going to be pretty robust and engaging, because it's only one person with your game, and you got to keep them entertained.
And exactly, I think so much of the gaming's or the memories that I have when I've been playing tabletops or board games with other people are just like, it's really good memories, right? So when you're alone, I guess the way you would create a new unique memory is by having like a new variation that you played. You're like, wow, that's so cool. I didn't expect that. Or it's reacting to you and you're creating new memories that way. Versus if it's the same thing every time, it gets kind of boring really quickly.
We try to introduce into Final Girl and into Hostage Negotiator, like what we call stand-up moments, where everything comes down to one decision or one die roll. Like, you're on your last health, you've got the axe, you're fighting the killer, they're about to die, and you need to make this one roll to be able to like chop his head off and kill him. Mm-hmm. And so it's what we call stand-up moments, where it's the point where you are so into this, you stand up to roll the table or to roll the dice on the table to see how it goes, because it all comes down to that moment. So we try to introduce those kinds of moments, and it's borne out by playtest reports and session reports we get from our backers where they say, "Oh my gosh, it came down to this final moment." And
stand-up moment, yeah, I like that.
It really is creating a memory like that. Our games are very thematic, and we try to. Not all board games are thematic. There's some very popular board games that are all mechanics based and are not thematic at all. But we try to introduce a lot of theme into our games, which kind of helps create those memories like you were talking about.
My final question for you here is, are you paying attention to any trends as relates to marketing or tabletops or Kickstarter? I think a lot more tabletop creators are starting to do stuff like Facebook ads, starting to become a little bit more savvy with that. Are there any trends that you are paying attention to?
We've always run Facebook ads because that was my background. I did Facebook marketing campaigns for movies. So we've always run those. But there are some trends in terms of there are a lot more third-party companies who are building their audience databases that you can connect with, who will do advertising for you, and some of them are getting quite good at it. And so in terms of marketing and trends, yes, that is growing. As the amount of money you can raise on a Kickstarter with a game grows, you are inevitably seeing more and more money being spent on marketing. I mean, Frosthaven right now is at $8.5 million for a board game, which is just mind-blowing. And yeah. I'm sure I'm getting hammered by ads on Facebook daily for them. So I'm sure they are spending a significant chunk of change there.
Totally. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing all those great tips. Where can people go and learn a little bit more about your project?
So you can find us at our website at vanrydergames.com. That's VANRYDER games.com. You can also go on Kickstarter and just search for Final Girl, and you'll find us there.
Great. Thanks a lot for coming on. I appreciate all those tips and insights.
Thank you, Sal. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified Podcast. My name is Salvador Brigman. Take a second to go and check out my website if you want to learn more about me, crowdcrux.com. And also, I hope you liked today's episode, that you took some stuff away from it. Lots of other stuff, lots of other great episodes out there. Always appreciate a rating and a review. But most of all, I hope that you are at least getting a clearer picture of what you have to do to be successful when it comes to crowdfunding. I hope that the clouds are kind of like parting, if you will, and you can see yourself doing this. There's nothing really stopping you nowadays. Like, think about it. As an entrepreneur, as a creator, as an artist, however you classify yourself, you have all the tools at your disposal. You have the website, which is Kickstarter. You have the education knowledge, which is what I bring to the table. You have all the marketing tools that you need. I'm sure you have a little bit of funding as well and a budget to even just put into this project to make sure that you're giving the best possible offer for your backers. And you have the backers. You have all this huge community of people that love new products, that love stuff that are coming out. Like, these are early adopters, right? So there's no excuse on the table for you not to take action. I think one of the biggest things when I was getting started was this idea of like imposter syndrome, that you're not sure if you're ready yet. And you're like always putting it off, and you don't feel necessarily like the right skills to be able to do this. And in reality, you probably are extremely gifted and you have lots of skills. And the greatest thing I think about online business and crowdfunding is you can actually tangibly see how it just connects with the marketplace. Like, you can just try it out. There's no downside to trying. We live in this culture nowadays where when you try something and you fail, particularly when it comes to academia or in established larger corporations, you're almost like shunned, right? It's almost a really negative sore point that people look down on you. They see you as a failure, as weak, etc. But the greatest thing about business and being an entrepreneur and starting new companies and trying out new projects, etc., is that it doesn't matter. No one cares. Like, I don't even remember most of my failures that I've had. I've definitely had a lot. It doesn't really matter because other people only really remember your successes. You only look back fondly on those memories, and the failures kind of almost become something you laugh about and you can tell stories about as you get older and you become a little bit more seasoned at your craft. And you can almost reminisce about the old days when you launched your first Kickstarter campaign, and like now you're 10 campaigns in, and how horrible your first one was, right? And you can laugh about it. And that's exactly how it is going to be. It's almost an initiation ritual, I think. I think that in order to really show the world your craft, your creativity, what you can bring to the table, you have to go through this initiation ritual. And that is, in this case, launching a campaign, right? And sharing it with the world. And that initiation ritual is meant to test you. It's meant to see how serious are you about this thing? If you're not super serious, if you're not dedicated enough, if you don't have enough strength of will, the universe is not going to reward you, man. You're just going to become another person who looks back when they're 80 years old and says, man, I really wish I had gone for that. I wish I had done that, right? There's no reason, it was dumb of me just not to do that. I feel regret now. I think that the universe really rewards people who are persistent, and it tests you in a certain sense of, are you really serious about this? Like, are you willing to go through a couple months of dedicated hard work and study and training in order to come out the other side a stronger person, have funding, have backers, have social proof, have social media followers? Are you willing to go through that same process that so many other entrepreneurs before you have walked in those exact same footsteps? They've gone down the same path. They've all faced their fears. And I think it's really a test. So if you're interested and you're feeling a little bit still fearful and you want a little bit more uncertainty, I do offer one-on-one coaching. These are intensive one-on-one coaching sessions where we review your project, we get into the strategy, I make sure that everything is going smoothly, and I introduce you to new tools and resources. I can introduce you to other people in the industry. If you want to bring me on board as part of your project, we can also discuss that. It's meant to make you feel much more confident and certain going into your campaign, because I think that's really where you're going to probably have a lot of difficulty, particularly like the day before you go live. It's always really scary. So I hope if you're interested, you can go and check that out. That's crowdcrux.com/coaching, crudcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. You can join me there. Just give me a little bit of information about you, your project, what your goals and aspirations are, so we can make the best use of our time. But thank you for joining me on this episode. My name is Sal, and I'll see you next time.